Amid the thick fog of World War II, a system of control was quietly implemented behind the front lines. Within it, thousands of young women across Asia were transferred to facilities operated by the Japanese military, known as comfort stations. The official term comfort women was used, but behind it lay a network run by orders, surveillance, and the erasure of identity. There was no comfort, only control and a prolonged silence. The system began taking shape in 1931 after Japan's invasion of Manchuria, as cities like Mukden and Changchun fell to the Japanese army. Reports emerged documenting systematic mistreatment of women in the occupied zones. Journalists and international witnesses noted that local women were treated as part of the machinery of control, subjected to forced labor and serious violations of human rights, instead of enforcing discipline among soldiers through regulation. The army established a system of supervised contact to maintain internal order and reduce pressure from international observers. In March 1932, the first comfort station was established in Shanghai. From there, a large-scale network, operated directly by the military, began to expand. In 1932, as Japan consolidated control over its occupied territories in China, the Japanese military faced a pressing issue: the violent behavior of its soldiers. Reports of assaults against local women spread widely, placing international pressure on Tokyo, especially since Japan was still a member of the League of Nations. Instead of reforming soldier conduct, military leaders implemented a policy aimed at regulating personal behavior within the ranks. The goal was to reduce random attacks and protect the nation's image abroad. Beyond avoiding international backlash, this policy also served to manage the psychological state of the troops. It was designed to keep soldiers obedient, relieve stress, and prevent the collapse of combat morale. The first station was established in Shanghai shortly after the January 28th incident in 1932. Located near the front lines, it operated under tight military supervision. Army doctors were assigned to conduct regular health checks to safeguard soldiers' well-being, while the condition of the women was often overlooked. The primary aim was to serve Japanese soldiers while reducing violence against Chinese civilians. This marked the beginning of a system designed to tightly control interactions behind the lines, backed and managed by the military as part of a long-term strategy of discipline and control. In 1937, following the Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing, Japan officially launched a full-scale war against China. The Imperial Army advanced into major cities such as Tianjin, Beijing, and Shanghai. That December, Nanjing fell. International reports documented widespread and severe acts of violence against civilians, sparking global outrage. These accounts placed significant pressure on the Tokyo government, especially as Japan was still a member of the League of Nations. Instead of reforming conduct within the military, Japanese commanders chose to expand the system of comfort stations. Local units were authorized to establish such facilities in any area where troops were stationed for extended periods. These stations rapidly appeared in major cities like Wuhan and Guangzhou, and later in inland regions such as Changsha and Chongqing. They were often set up in abandoned buildings, schools, warehouses, just behind the front lines. By 1940, the system had expanded significantly. It's estimated that around 400 stations were operating in Japanese-occupied territories across China. Women were frequently relocated due to the harsh conditions, which made it difficult for many to remain in one place for long. The system functioned like a logistical unit, complete with supply chains, record-keeping, and personnel rotation, mirroring the structure of a military infrastructure. when Japan expanded the war into the Pacific in 1941. The network of comfort stations grew accordingly. Many facilities were established in French Indochina, Malaysia, and Singapore, becoming transit hubs for moving women to frontline areas throughout Southeast Asia. In many cases, women were transported under poor conditions, often without being informed of their destination. They were typically moved by train or truck, confined in sealed compartments with no control over their journey. This system was not just a service for soldiers, it was part of a broader strategy to control and exploit occupied territories. The comfort station system was not merely a component of Japan's military logistics policy. It was also a vast network designed to control women across many Asian territories, where thousands of young girls were placed into environments meant to serve the logistical needs of the Japanese army. Most of those affected or forcibly relocated came from Korea, a Japanese colony since 1910, where poverty was widespread and strict social control prevailed. Many of them were very young, making them especially vulnerable. Recruiters traveled through villages, promising well-paid jobs in hospitals, textile factories, or army kitchens. Struggling families, driven by desperation, believed those promises. But what awaited the girls was far from what had been described. Some were taken suddenly, on the road, or even directly from their homes. At the stations, their original identities were often erased. New names were assigned for easier tracking within the administrative system. They were recorded in official documents as logistical personnel and given identification numbers, like other auxiliary units. Some were sent to facilities near the front lines, while others were transported far away by train or ship, under harsh conditions and without being told where they were going. In regions such as Hebei, Shandong, and Hunan, China, many young women were taken during military operations, often following large-scale civilian sweeps. Their families rarely received news or had any chance of reunion. In Southeast Asia, the pattern repeated. In the Philippines, similar methods were employed. In areas like Manila, Pampanga, and Leyte, some girls, still very young, were taken from their everyday surroundings, including schools or churches, by recruitment groups. In Indonesia, then the Dutch East Indies, women from the islands of Java and Sumatra were among the most affected. After Japan occupied Dutch colonial territories in 1942, some European and mixed-race women held in civilian internment camps were transferred to isolated locations, where they were forced to serve in military support roles. In Burma and Thailand, the Japanese military relied on military orders and local collaborators to coordinate the deployment of women to strategic military posts. As part of their logistical operations, most of those affected came from disadvantaged backgrounds. Many had already lost family members during air raids or earlier military campaigns. For families living in poverty, protecting loved ones from the reach of an organized force was nearly impossible. Once relocated, the chances of return were extremely slim. Movement was tightly restricted. The women typically had no identification papers, no financial resources, and no way to communicate with the outside world. Movements were often carried out under military coordination. In many cases, those being relocated were not informed of their destination. Numerous individuals disappeared from records afterward. Living conditions at the stations were extremely limited, with cramped quarters and makeshift facilities. Some stations were set up in abandoned schools or warehouses. Others consisted only of tents, dugouts, or temporary shelters, depending on the terrain. Daily routines were strictly controlled. Those inside were required to follow a rigid schedule and internal rules, including designated times for meals, rest, and interactions. Schedules ran from early morning until late at night. Soldiers were assigned time slots according to regulations, and each woman was often required to receive a large number of soldiers per day, with minimal rest between encounters. Documentation shows that these numbers could surge during intense military campaigns, when troops were granted short rest periods at the stations. The women had little to no control over their schedules or conditions. Personal health was not prioritized. Many were made to continue working even when physically unfit. Regular medical examinations were conducted, mainly to ensure that soldiers were not exposed to infectious diseases. Women who contracted illnesses were isolated in small rooms or transferred to remote facilities. Some were treated with medical methods that caused severe side effects. Those who did not recover quickly were often removed from active rosters and ceased to be monitored by military authorities. Pregnancy was considered a violation of regulations. Some women reported being forced to terminate pregnancies under unsafe conditions. In rare cases where children were born, official records rarely documented their fate. The constant threat of violence created an atmosphere of despair. Some women attempted to escape, but few succeeded. Those who tried were often severely punished. These punishments were sometimes carried out publicly as a deterrent. Some individuals succumbed to the overwhelming physical and psychological pressure. Others simply disappeared from the records, with their whereabouts unknown. In certain regions, particularly Manchuria, the cruelty exceeded what was typically observed at these stations. At Unit 731 in Harbin, under the command of General Shiro Ishii, individuals were subjected to biological warfare experiments. Documents indicate that some were deliberately exposed to lethal pathogens for biomedical observation. Some were forced into unsafe physical contact with infected individuals. These experiments were conducted without anesthesia, resulting in extreme pain. In some cases, pregnant women were used to study physiological reactions under experimental medical conditions. Many did not survive these procedures, and records of their identities were rarely preserved. In the Philippines and Burma, the use of mobile comfort stations made living conditions for women increasingly harsh. Women were transported much like military supplies. They were loaded onto trucks, moved across mountainous terrain, and transferred to temporary encampments. Many were forced to walk for hours without proper footwear, food, or shelter. As the front lines shifted, conditions grew more severe. Women often slept in overcrowded tents or abandoned buildings, lacking basic sanitation, and facing extreme weather and ongoing conflict. Toward the final stages of the war, testimonies describe soldiers becoming increasingly violent, with stricter control and harsher treatment of women. To avoid leaving evidence, some units were reportedly involved in eliminating witnesses during retreat. In the Solomon Islands, there were accounts of women being brutally treated to ensure that no trace remained. These actions, while not officially documented at the time, later emerged through post-war investigations. By mid-1944, as Japan began losing ground across the Pacific, the comfort station system began to collapse. Allied forces, led by the United States, steadily recaptured islands such as Guam, the Philippines, and Iwo Jima. Under the pressure of war, Japan's supply lines broke down, and discipline within military units deteriorated. As the logistical system fell apart, comfort stations became an unmanageable burden. Many stations were dismantled during Japanese retreats, partly to avoid detection by advancing Allied forces. Some commanders feared that if women fell into Allied hands, details about the internal operations of the system could be exposed. In some regions, orders were issued to prevent information leaks during withdrawal. On the island of Saipan, as American troops advanced, Allied reports noted the sudden disappearance of many women near the front lines before Japanese forces retreated. Certain records describe unusual activity at isolated compounds just before Japanese forces withdrew. In Okinawa, post-war findings revealed traces indicating that Korean women had been held near military tunnels in what appeared to be conditions of confinement. In certain regions, women were left behind in sealed structures as Japanese forces retreated. On the island of Leyte in late 1944, an American unit discovered a locked facility near an abandoned military camp. Inside, they found a group of Koreans and Filipino women in a state of severe exhaustion, having been isolated for weeks without supplies or contact. In Indonesia, stations in Java and Sumatra were abandoned in remote plantations or jungle camps. Many women were left behind in isolation, with no means of leaving these remote locations. Some attempted to find their way back through dense forests, but many did not survive due to the harsh conditions and lack of resources. When Japan formally surrendered in August 1945, following the events in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Manchuria, the comfort station system came to an official end. But this collapse did not bring freedom for most of the victims. Many had no home to return to, nor any way to prove their identity. Those who survived faced harsh social stigma. In Korea, many women returning after the war were met with suspicion and social prejudice. Some families were hesitant to accept them back, fearing damage to their reputation or social standing. In China and the Philippines, the situation was similar. Many women chose to remain silent, afraid of being blamed or ostracized. They tried to rebuild their lives quietly, taking on simple jobs, and avoiding any mention of the past. Most received no medical care. Despite enduring lasting physical injuries and chronic illnesses, before Allied forces arrived, many records related to the system had been destroyed or were no longer officially maintained. In the post-war period, there was little effort made to investigate or support those who had been affected. Only in a few rare trials, such as one held in the Dutch East Indies in 1948, did authorities begin to document testimony. In that case, the Dutch government recorded statements from over 35 women, opening one of the earliest legal case files related to the system. When World War II ended, the women who had been forced to serve as comfort women were largely forgotten, but starting in the early 1990s, they began to break their silence. In 1991, Kim Hak-sun, a Korean woman who had been a victim of the comfort station system, became the first to publicly share her story at a press conference. She spoke openly about her traumatic experiences during captivity and the harsh treatment she endured. Her testimony sparked a movement. Dozens of other women from various Asian countries also came forward, sharing details about where they had been held and identifying some of the individuals involved. A number of Dutch women who had been detained in Indonesia added their voices, helping to reveal the global scale of the system. International pressure pushed Japan to respond. In 1992, investigations were launched to review wartime documents. By 1993, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono issued the Kono Statement, acknowledging the Japanese military's role in organizing comfort stations and confirming that coercion had occurred in some cases. However, Japan did not issue any binding legal commitments. Some political views argued that the recruitment had been conducted by civilians and was not entirely forced, which made the statement's message controversial. In 1995, Japan supported the creation of the Asian Women's Fund to provide financial and medical assistance to surviving victims. The fund was financed through private donations, not government budget, and offered each recipient approximately 2 million yen, around 20,000 USD at the time, along with a signed letter of acknowledgement from the program's representative. Many women rejected the compensation, arguing that it was insufficient and lacked an official acknowledgement from the government. They called on the Japanese government to formally accept responsibility and issue clear legal commitments. Civil lawsuits were filed in Japanese courts. Individuals from several countries submitted petitions, demanding official responses. But most cases were dismissed due to legal barriers related to statutes of limitations and the jurisdiction of wartime events. Though unsuccessful, the lawsuits drew global attention. Human rights groups and survivors brought the issue to international bodies. At the United Nations, they testified before the Commission on Human Rights. In 2001, a special UN report described the comfort station system as a serious human rights violation and recommended that Japan provide clear and comprehensive responses to the individuals affected. In Japan, public opinion remained divided. Some expressed sympathy, while others argued that the matter was a historical issue that should be laid to rest. International recognition grew. In 2007, the United States House of Representatives passed Resolution 121, urging Japan to issue an official apology for the suffering caused in the past. Canada, the Netherlands, and the European Parliament also passed similar resolutions. In South Korea, since 1992, weekly demonstrations have taken place in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, gradually attracting international media attention in the 2000s. In 2011, a bronze statue of a young girl was erected across from the embassy, becoming a powerful symbol of remembrance. Some Japanese officials responded by calling it an inappropriate act in the context of diplomacy. In 2015, Japan and South Korea reached a bilateral agreement in which Tokyo contributed 1 billion yen, around 8.3 million USD, to fund medical and welfare support for the remaining survivors. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also expressed deep remorse in an official statement. However, some argued the agreement did not fully reflect their views and lacked clear legal accountability. In the years that followed, more memorial statues appeared in cities, like San Francisco and Berlin, sparking mixed reactions between nations. By 2024, only a few survivors remained. But discussions around accountability and memory continued. Many passed away in silence. Those who remain, now elderly, still hope for a full and honest acknowledgement. The question that remains: do we have the courage to listen before the final voices are gone? You're watching Case X. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's hidden records. If you found this content meaningful, feel free to follow so you don't miss our next analysis. See you in the next episode.